Funding for Frontline is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Tonight on Frontline, the invasion of Grenada. It was hailed as an American triumph.
Grenada, we were told, was a friendly island paradise for tourism. Well, it wasn't. We got there just in time.
Nearly 10,000 American troops were sent to rescue 600 medical students. But they made shocking mistakes, which may have put American lives in even more danger.
The question is whether the Americans, our country, put us in more danger by invading.
Tonight, Operation Urgent Fury.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline with Judy Woodruff.
Good evening. Remember Grenada? Here at the White House, the successful rescue of American citizens caught in a bloody coup d'etat on that Caribbean island in the fall of 1983 is remembered as a victory for President Reagan and the country. The American people overwhelmingly supported the invasion, codenamed Operation Urgent Fury. Even now, after a year of sharp attacks on his judgment and his foreign policy, the president frequently points to Grenada as one of his major accomplishments. But tonight, a new Frontline investigation by reporter Seymour Hersh reveals a very different picture of the invasion of Grenada. It is a disturbing examination of the failures by the State Department, intelligence agencies, and the military. It is a report that challenges both the popular image and the administration's view of what President Reagan called a brilliant campaign. Our report is called Operation Urgent Fury. It was produced by Mark Obenhaus and is reported by Seymour Hersh.
November the 4th, 1983. President Reagan is at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, to commemorate the Americans who died in the bombing of the Marine barracks in Lebanon and the invasion of the tiny Caribbean island of Grenada. The tragic loss of 241 young Marines in Lebanon was made bearable for many Americans by the victory 2 days later in Grenada. The invasion of Grenada would emerge as the president's most enduring foreign policy triumph of his first term. He defended it as the price America must pay to confront Soviet-style communism.
Grenada, we were told, was a friendly island paradise for tourism. Well, it wasn't. It was a Soviet-Cuban colony being readied as a major military bastion to export terror and undermine democracy. We got there just in time.
The invasion, which began on October 25, 1983, put American forces into combat for the first time since the Vietnam War. The public was told that the overriding objective of the mission was the rescue of 600 American medical students.
We're here to make sure you guys get home tonight.
They were described as potential hostages of Cuban and Grenadian forces.
We're happy to be here.
Thank God for the United States military and Reagan behind them.
Thank God we got out.
If they hadn't come and got us, we wouldn't have got out. We'd have been Cuban hostages.
Right. Very good.
The nation backed its president's show of force as he celebrated the students' safe return.
Welcome home.
Today, more than 4 years later, the successful rescue of the American medical students is seen by many as a prudent use of force. But was the invasion of Grenada necessary? This report asks two basic questions about Operation Urgent Fury. Were the American medical students really in imminent danger? And did the administration seriously attempt to resolve the crisis by diplomatic means? This is also the story of a dismal failure by American intelligence agencies. and the account of a hastily planned military operation that, in the end, jeopardized the very lives it was meant to save, the 600 American medical students on the island. The confrontation with Grenada had its beginnings in ideology. It was a clash that started as a war of words between Ronald Reagan and the revolutionary government of Grenada.
This is all that is left today of Butler House, the headquarters of the Grenadian Revolutionary Government. It was one of the first targets of American airstrikes. By the time of the invasion, most Americans had forgotten that the president had repeatedly singled out Grenada and its charismatic and popular leader, Maurice Bishop, as a threat to American national security. It was in this office, 7 months before the invasion, that the late Maurice Bishop was interviewed.
President Reagan and his advisors, his top officials, are very concerned about the experiment that we are building in Grenada. They are conscious that we are openly and publicly saying that we are about the task of developing a new socio-political and economic path of development, that we are out of the game of backyardism, and we are out of the game of Westminster-style democracy, and so forth. Now, that is a very, very dangerous thing, so far as President Reagan is concerned, because President Reagan sees himself as an international crusader for his concept of democracy and for his concept of free enterprise development.
Nowhere in its whole sordid history have the promises of communism been redeemed. Everywhere it has exploited and aggravated temporary economic suffering to seize power and then to institutionalize economic deprivation and suppress human rights. In the Caribbean, we above all seek to protect those values and principles that shape the proud heritage of this hemisphere. Some, however, have turned from their American neighbors and their heritage. Let them return to the traditions and common values of this hemisphere, and we all will welcome them. The choice is theirs.
Ronald Reagan's words were clearly directed at Maurice Bishop and the radical government of Grenada. The former British colony had long been friendly to the United States, but that changed in early 1979 when Bishop and his supporters overthrew the corrupt and much-feared regime of Sir Eric Gairy in a bloodless coup. The new government immediately moved Grenada closer to the communist world. With the aid of Cuba and the Soviet Union, it began building up the armed forces on the island. Shortly after Bishop's takeover, President Carter appointed Sally Shelton Colby as ambassador to the Eastern Caribbean.
I spent about 6 months after I arrived trying to develop a relationship of respect and understanding with the Grenadians. I liked Prime Minister Maurice Bishop a great deal as a human being. We had our philosophical disagreements, but I felt he had great, deep and sincere interest in making things better for Grenadians, which I couldn't say about Eric Gairy, his predecessor, who was overthrown. After 6 months of trying very hard to get along with the Grenadians, we did a policy review in Washington, which basically resulted that the efforts to develop a closer relationship with Grenada had failed, and that therefore we should distance ourselves. I disagreed very strongly with this. I thought it was very short-sighted. And I think for a country with the very important strategic interests in the Caribbean, such as we have, it is myopic to not have your own sources of information and to develop your own analysis. We never really knew what was happening on the island.
By 1983, Assistant Secretary of State Langhorne Motley was in charge of Reagan's policy toward Grenada.
Bishop was an unelected head of state that was taking Grenada over a period of time in a direction, both its domestic policies and its foreign policies, that were not in the direction that the United States would like to see. That is to say, it was an unelected government. It did not have the principles of freedom of the press. It didn't have the principles of free association, private enterprise. Its foreign policy was closer aligned to Cuba's than to the rest of the Caribbean.
Was it a big deal for you guys?
Well, Grenada is a small island. It's 8 by 18 miles. It's less than 100,000 people. It's not something people dwelled on, but it could be considered a minor irritant.
Grenada became more than a minor irritant to the administration when it was learned that Cuban workers had been sent by Fidel Castro to help construct an international airport at Point Salinas, on the island's southern tip. Bishop and his advisors explained that the airport was essential for attracting more tourists. The goal, they said, was to reduce the country's dependence on the export of cash crops, such as bananas and nutmeg.
We see our international airport, in fact, in exactly the same way as 150 years ago. Your people would have seen the American railways. You would have seen the railway as being the hope for the future, correctly. We see the international airport the same way.
Bishop's explanation for the airport was rejected in Washington. The president and his advisors were convinced that the Soviet Union and Cuba intended to use the airport for military purposes. The official, who as the president's personal emissary played a major role in recommending the invasion, was Ambassador Francis McNeil. He retired last year as a senior deputy in the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research.
To your knowledge, was there any special efforts made to increase the intelligence presence or collection or assess Grenada?
No, as you know, I'm very chary about going into details. I still have an obligation out of government. But I think in this case I can say that there wasn't much in the way of special action because we didn't know very much except the number of Cuban troops on the island. We did not, so far as I know, make an effort. We didn't have a diplomatic presence on the island. And I think we pretty much lived by the descriptions in our own rhetoric rather than seeking the reality of the situation on the island. I sort of had the sense that it was kind of a huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your Marxist house down kind of thing.
Grenada, that tiny little island, with Cuba at the west end of the Caribbean, Grenada at the east end, that tiny little island is building now, or having built for it, on its soil and shores, a naval base, a superior air base, storage bases and facilities for the storage of munitions, barracks and training grounds for the military. It isn't nutmeg that's at stake in the Caribbean and Central America. It is the United States' national security.
I was absolutely staggered because he was talking about a Grenada that didn't have much resemblance to the Grenada to which I had been accredited as ambassador. He was describing, for example, a naval facility, a naval base, if you will, including a submarine base, which I had heard rumors of when I was there, and as a matter of fact, had sent the head of my consular section down to where it was reputed to be under construction to take a look at it, and he came back and said, well, there's nothing there but an old broken down fisherman's dock jutting out into the water. No indication of any kind of construction activity whatsoever. So I felt very uncertain and frankly a bit shaken that the president would be talking about such a huge military buildup on an island that I had left such a short time before, where I did not see such evidence of a huge military buildup.
13 days later, the president again cited Grenada in a nationally televised speech.
The rapid buildup of Grenada's military potential is unrelated to any conceivable threat to this island country of under 110,000 people, and totally at odds with the pattern of other Eastern Caribbean states, most of which are unarmed. The Caribbean is a very important passageway for our international commerce and military lines of communication. More than half of all American oil imports now pass through the Caribbean. The Cubans, with Soviet financing and backing, are in the process of building an airfield with a 10,000-foot runway. Grenada doesn't even have an air force. Who is it intended for?
Yes, Grenada had a long runway. Every Caribbean country in the area would like to have such a long runway. Several do. Several have runways that were even longer than that of Grenada. They all depend on tourism, and they all need 747s, bringing in tourists from Europe and the United States. So I had the impression, watching the president that evening, that the president was almost wanting to see these installations in Grenada as opposed to actually seeing them or having evidence that they were there.
Wishful thinking is a problem that afflicts any government, and it afflicts professional diplomats from time to time, as well as political appointees. But it seemed to me that the ideological component in the Reagan administration really harkened back almost to the McCarthy period.
In what sense?
In the sense that the threat was built up so much, and that people sort of raised their voice and suggested things weren't quite that bad, then they seemed to then they got viewed as disloyal or undercutting policy and that sort of thing. But there was an unwillingness, there was a reluctance to sort of sit down and really look at at these kinds of issues, clearly, because nothing was done to collect information, and we didn't really know what was going on.
The president's accusations were viewed as a direct threat by the Grenadian leaders. Deputy Prime Minister Bernard Cord.
Comrades, I want to draw your attention to something that we must never forget, and that is the record of the United States governments over the years. Their records for telling lies, for making up stories when they want to invade a country, when they want to engage in a massive campaign of destabilization. They always start off by the most incredible propaganda stories about the country. They always start off by trying to build up a mood of hysteria to try and convince their people in order to be able to lay the groundwork for attacks on another country.
The next speaker, Maurice Bishop, predicted an American invasion.
In exactly the same way that they have had to move to violent force against other popular progressive revolutions around the world, they are right now, this very minute, sitting down and planning the final stages of their armed attack against our revolution.
2 months later, the United States staged a mock attack on an island in the Caribbean, further intimidating the leaders of Grenada. No one in the American government discouraged their fears that it was a dress rehearsal for an invasion. Within weeks, Maurice Bishop traveled to Washington seeking a meeting with the president. He met instead with Undersecretary of State Kenneth Dam and Judge William Clark, the National Security Advisor. Bishop seemed optimistic at a later press conference.
Were you able, in all these contacts you've had, to establish beyond all shadow of doubt that Grenada is not a threat to the security of the United States?
I think even before I landed in the United States, that was established beyond any shadow of doubt, frankly. As you remember, the main peg around which this alleged threat rested was the peg of the international airport. Now, following President Reagan's second speech attacking Grenada, the Star Wars speech on the 23rd of March, an ABC television crew came down to Grenada. And they discovered that they didn't have to go up into a spy plane to take photographs, that they can just go to the airport site and take photographs. They discovered that right at the tip of the runway was a medical school with 700 young American students earning their right to become doctors. That these young American students were running up and down the airport runway every day. It was their main jogging path. So as far as I am concerned, even before we got here, that particular piece of mythology had been blasted. But I would certainly hope that if there was any residue of doubt left, that the last 10 days would certainly have cleared it up once and for all.
Maurice Bishop's attempt to reduce tensions between his country and Washington came to an end in this courtyard on October the 19th, 1983. He died here 6 days before the American invasion. A power struggle broke out in early October when Bernard Cord, Bishop's deputy, moved against him. Cord, with the support of the Grenadian Army, headed by General Hudson Austin, placed Bishop under house arrest. Grenada's ambassador in Washington was Decima Williams, a strong supporter of Maurice Bishop, who bitterly opposed his overthrow.
As soon as the public had wind that Bishop's leadership was being challenged, and that Cord was not firmly on his side. The people smelt it, as we say, right away, and they said that this thing is not going to be successful. We're not going to support that.
Cord and Austin had badly underestimated Bishop's popularity. These pictures, recorded by an amateur photographer, show the Grenadian people taking to the streets to protest Bishop's arrest. Bishop was rescued and marched by his supporters to the Army headquarters at Fort Rupert, high above St. George's, Grenada's capital. Troops were dispatched to reclaim the fort. Gunfire broke out. Hundreds of terrified citizens jumped, many to their death, to avoid being shot. Bishop and at least 7 of his followers were seized by the military, lined up, and executed against this wall.
The People's Revolutionary Armed Forces have, as of 3 p.m. today, established a revolutionary military council.
The chaos ended only when General Hudson Austin took control and went on the radio to announce a 24-hour shoot-to-kill curfew.
That our major task at this moment is to protect and defend our country against any attack by imperialism. Anyone who seeks to demonstrate or disturb the peace will be shot.
The Reagan administration simply had an enormous piece of luck, if I may speak so bluntly, when Morris Bishop was killed. Because without that murder, unknown in the Caribbean, violence is not known in the English-speaking Caribbean, there would not have been the support required for the Reagan administration to go into Grenada.
The students at the St. George's Medical School had always been insulated from the turbulence of local politics. Were these 600 Americans now threatened by the Grenadian government's self-destruction? Their safety would soon become the public rationale offered by the Reagan administration for the invasion of Grenada.
The danger aspect for the students came from the fact of the absence of assurances from any bona fide authorities. Every report that we got showed that there didn't seem to be much organization or discipline on the island, other than the fact that there was this curfew that was imposed throughout most of the day, and we didn't have any assurances. And the students were billeted in 3 campuses, and also some lived in the town. So there were 600 U.S. citizens in 4 different concentrations on this island. That gave cause for alarm. The thought early on crossed the minds of many people that it was a situation ripe for hostages.
Was that potential, you think, a decisive factor in the eventual decision to go in?
I think that absolutely the potential for taking a large number of hostages and the inability to get assurances that that would not happen, in my mind, was the driving force for the president's final decision.
If you were correct in your assumptions about what the Grenadians and Cubans might do, you could obviously have a very serious crisis.
Yes, I had less assumptions about the Cubans taking hostages, frankly. I don't think, at least the people I were talking with in Washington, believed that it would be likely that Castro would order taking hostages. But you had an island in ferment, you just had a...
Francis McNeill was abruptly dispatched to the Caribbean 2 days before the invasion to serve as the president's personal envoy. He made his recommendation within 12 hours of his arrival.
And you had a lot of Grenadans running around with guns, some of whom had been shooting indiscriminately. And it wasn't as if anyone had control of the island. And I thought there was a dangerous situation. My recommendation was that we go in, but if we go in quickly, or else we better look for other alternatives.
The curfew was effective. The island streets were deserted, and there was no more bloodshed. The Army, under Hudson Austin, was in control. But the general had no contact with the American government, and Washington had no first-hand knowledge of his intentions.
I don't believe Hudson Austin would have ordered the taking of American hostages. I don't believe that he would have taken any action to precipitate an American or a Caribbean military response to what was clearly a complete disaster inside the country. I believe that Austin would have try to find a way out of the mess that he and several others had created. My information also suggested that's what he did, that in fact he was involved in dialogue, in negotiations with the officers of the medical school.
One of General Austin's first acts was to reach out to the medical school. On the morning after the shooting, he visited the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Jeffrey Bourne.
The meeting I had with General Austin tended to reassure me that he had no intent of harming the students at that time, so that I felt that the students were not in any danger of a bunch of people going down there with guns and shooting them up. The fact that he was even prepared to open up the supermarket to get food for them was encouraging, and so that I did not feel there was an immediate urgency at that time.
The medical school officials remained skeptical of Austin's assurances.
At first we doubted his word. We kept testing him.
From his office in Bayshore, New York, the medical school chancellor, Charles Modica, spoke frequently with General Austin by telephone.
But in his own mind, it was very important that the school remain on the island and classes be held, and he was willing to do anything and everything to make sure that the students were safe and that the classes were held and that the employees' jobs were safeguarded. And we were cooperating with him, knowing that that was his goal.
Could you communicate this to our government?
Yes, I did communicate it to the State Department at that time.
The State Department chose not to consult with the Chancellor, even though he had first-hand information and was directly responsible for the students.
Well, the State Department didn't give much credence to what I was saying, at least from my own point of view, and they intimated that they had their own sources, and their sources were probably much better than mine. And thanks for calling, and I was questioning whether they were even taking any of the information I was giving them at any higher level at a few different points in time.
Did you know that the school was in contact with General Hudson Austin during this period?
There were some indications that some authorities from the school may have been talking to what they considered to be Grenada officials. Whether there was an indication that they talked to General Austin specifically, I don't recall. There was an attempt on the part of the school, I think, to talk with what they considered to be the authorities on the island. Obviously, if the school was on the island, it obviously had contact with many Grenadans. I would find it strange if they didn't talk with people.
The medical school was represented in Washington by the Vice Chancellor's son, Peter Bourne. He had been a senior White House official in the Carter administration.
What I think is truly extraordinary is that the Reagan administration and the State Department failed to take advantage of this extraordinary source of information that they had through the medical school. They had my father there in Grenada. They had Charles Modica in Bayshore in regular contact with Grenada. They had myself here in Washington. And yet nobody in the Reagan administration made any effort to contact us to get information that could have been helpful. This is in very, very sharp contrast to what happened in 1979 when the Gary regime was overthrown in Grenada. Again, you had a period of time when communications were cut through the usual channels, and the State Department, the National Security Council, took tremendous advantage of the access that the medical school had. Messages were passed through me and through Charles Modica to Grenada. We were able to check on the safety of Peace Corps volunteers who were out in the rural areas of Grenada. And the contrast between the way it was handled in '79, utilizing this resource, and the complete absence of any attempt to use it by the Reagan administration is just striking. And to me, there is no other conclusion that I can draw other than that they were just not interested in the information.
You're satisfied that the government pursued all other options prior to invasion and that it knew enough about the island to make a judgment that invasion was necessary?
I'm fully satisfied that we took every step that we could possibly take in trying to work the peaceful evacuation of those citizens prior to making the recommendation to the President, his acceptance of the decision, that we now proceed with force. Under the situation of what we knew, the time frame in which we were working, I am totally satisfied that we took every possible step.
As planning for a military invasion of Grenada intensified, President Reagan and his Secretary of State traveled to Augusta, Georgia, to keep a previously scheduled golf outing. They acted as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But the President had secretly ordered that a 10-ship U.S. Navy task force en route to Lebanon be diverted to the waters off Grenada. Early on Sunday, October 23rd, as the Joint Chiefs of Staff were hastily pulling together their plan for the invasion of Grenada, tragedy struck in the Middle East. 241 American Marines were killed in a terrorist bombing attack in Beirut. Their deaths did not derail the planning for Grenada. Leslie Janka was the press officer for the National Security Council.
Both the Lebanon involvement of the United States and the Grenada incursion reflected a sense of the Reagan administration from the very beginning that it was time to show, and the administration's word, that America was back, that we were cured of the post-Vietnam syndrome of the use of military force, of America taking strong diplomatic action. But a far more important overlap of the two events was the fact that almost as a cover for the Grenada operation was the blowing up of the Marine barracks in Beirut, and the tragedy in Lebanon kept a lot of people focused on that issue and allowed the planning and the development of activities to go on for Grenada.
36 hours after the Beirut bombing, the President convened a final meeting. He had already authorized reconnaissance operations against Grenada and had learned that 4 men had drowned attempting to infiltrate the island.
The presidential decision came down finally on, the final meeting was on a Monday night, October 24th, Monday, about 5 or 6 o'clock. The meeting took place in the Situation Room in the White House with the President in the chair. Present were the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the National Security Advisors, 2 or 3 or 4 more. Each one of them gave their appropriate briefings. There were some questions raised by some of the members, exploratory, not aggressive type of questions. To the point, the President made a couple of questions himself. The President then asked if there were any other questions, any other comments. And there ensued a silence that probably lasted 30 seconds, but to me lasted like 5 minutes. Because in the final analysis, it's the President that has to make that decision. And after this silence, he said, okay, let's go.
The operation was given a code name, Urgent Fury. American military bases from Florida to the state of Washington had been put on alert over the weekend and began to mobilize. Those few senior officers who knew where the men were going were confident.
Our battalion commander comes out and says, men, we're going down to rescue some people. He says it shouldn't take more than a weekend. We should be right back here. He says, I don't really foresee any problems with it. Told us that we were facing a force of about 1,700 individuals. Some of them regular Army, some of them mostly comprised of a National Guard force. He said he didn't see any reason why it should be all that complicated. We should be in and out, no problem whatsoever. So after that, we're all looking at each other. He still hasn't said where we're going, why we're going, just that we're going somewhere and we're going to run across some resistance. Some of you will come home, possible chance some of you won't. So we're all kind of looking at each other and we're all trying to basically figure out where are we going. Are we going to Lebanon? Are we going to Nicaragua, El Salvador? Where are we going? No one said anything yet. Well, I was sitting next to the weapons platoon leader, and I was asking him, I said, what's basically going on? He says, I really don't know myself, to tell you the truth. He says, if I can tell you this, I don't think you have much to worry about.
The deputy task force commander for the Grenada operation was 3-star Army General Norman Schwarzkopf.
The intelligence we had on hand about the enemy was 1,200 People's Revolutionary Army of Grenada, another couple of hundred, 200 to 400 police force, and the information we had that as the Army went, so would go the police. 600 Cubans of unknown capability. Cuban workers with some military trainers and augmentation within them. The enemy had been portrayed as ill-equipped, poorly organized, and probably not capable of any resistance. At the first shots fired, would throw down their weapons and run. Quite specifically, it was assumed that the Cubans wouldn't fight. You have to understand that the original plan envisioned everything being over by about 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
At precisely 5:37 on the morning of October 25th, the Army's 75th Rangers began parachuting onto the runway at Point Salinas. Operation Urgent Fury was underway. Every branch of the American Armed Forces would soon be in combat. But the invasion of Grenada was in trouble within minutes. The original plan was not working.
What was it like for the first wave of men parachuting?
You have to visualize literally a cone of tracer fire, green tracer fire, coming up into the air. C-130 aircraft flying in directly underneath this cone of tracer fire, paratroopers dropping in the air and then being shot at in the air from all sides on the ground. I can't recall any combat operation that the United States has ever been involved in that could have been any more intense than that, and that's probably the most intense type of combat that we've ever been involved in. In other words, for those Rangers that were hanging in those parachutes in the air at that time, that was absolute total war.
There had been a stunning failure. American lives were being lost because somehow the intelligence agencies had been unable to tell the battlefield commanders what they needed to know about the enemy.
If we had known that the anti-aircraft was going to be as effective as it was, we would have suppressed it ahead of time with fire. We really didn't have good intelligence on their ability as anti-aircraft gunners. And quite the contrary, we've been led to believe that they were lousy. We had not suppressed the anti-aircraft fire. And of course, what happened is a lot of the helicopters took hits right off the bat.
Reports of heavy fighting had reached the White House when President Reagan, accompanied by Eugenia Charles, Prime Minister of Dominica, went on television to announce the invasion.
Early this morning, forces from 6 Caribbean democracies and the United States began a landing or landings on the island of Grenada in the Eastern Caribbean. The United States objectives are clear: to protect our own citizens, to facilitate the evacuation of those who want to leave, and to help in the restoration of democratic institutions in Grenada.
The Rangers secured the airstrip by 11 a.m., and the 82nd Airborne began arriving in force. The situation on the ground was confused.
When we landed, the tailgate dropped down, and we all ran out. They couldn't have had too great of intelligence because, like I said, they didn't know where we were going or what we were going to do. We got there, they told us, move over here, so we all ran over here and kind of set up a little hasty perimeter so the company makes it to a formation to hold a piece of ground, more or less. And then they said, no, we don't want to be here, we want to be over here. So we go over to this side of the area, and we sat there for about 10, 15 minutes. No, they want us back up here now. They handed us out tourist maps when we got there. And, no grid coordinates. And I don't know, you should know that when you have to make indirect fire calls for mortar fire or aircraft fire or any type of support fire that we would need from artillery or whatnot, you need to have a grid coordinate to precisely land that shell. Otherwise, there's a chance of making some of us the casualties of our own actions. Well, they handed us these tourist maps, and we had no way to direct anything from these maps. They had points of interest. Fine, if I was on a 7-day vacation and I wanted to go see Grand Anse Harbor or go visit the Windsor Estate Nutmeg Plantation, that'd been great. But if I got a call in for artillery fire, I'm like, well, just direct that 300 meters left of this point of interest we have here on the map.
The publisher of the Armed Forces Journal is a West Point graduate, Ben Schemmer.
How can you let an operation be planned for 3 days on an island that the president has identified, 7 months before in March or April of that year as of strategic interest and concern to the United States of America, and not have the youngsters invading it or assaulting it or liberating it have available to them before they go face gun barrels maps of the island. It's unconscionable.
This map, passed out to American forces, was published in 1978 by the Grenada Tourist Board.
And according to the Commander-in-Chief Atlantic After Action Report, unfortunately, the Defense Mapping Agency was not tasked to produce the maps until 25 October, primarily because of OPSEC, or operational security considerations, and these high-quality maps did not arrive on Grenada until the operation was largely over. That strikes me as being a cruel disconnect.
The map showed just one site for the medical school. The campus, called True Blue, was located only a few hundred yards from the airport.
By the end of D-Day, we had gone to the True Blue campus, gotten there to rescue the students, and found out that most of the students weren't there, they were someplace else. And the enemy was between us and where they were.
And you hadn't known that before you hit
Had not known that. All the information we had was the students were at True Blue Medical Campus. That was the objective.
Can you give me your reaction when you learned that?
Oh, I was shocked. Stunned. There's no other word for it. I mean, the Rangers burst in the door, sort of, if it had been a Hollywood movie, it would have kind of gone like this. The Rangers broke through the door and said, ta-da, we're here, you're rescued. And the student said, yeah, but what about the rest of us, And the Ranger says, what do you mean about the rest of us? They say, oh, we're the small campus. They're all located someplace else. I mean, you can imagine the shock.
The 138 students at the True Blue campus were rescued by early afternoon. But by nightfall, when the operation was to have been completed, more than 450 students were still on the island.
When I learned that the invading forces did not have knowledge of our second campus, that it even existed, let alone its location, I was angry. I was angered not only by the fact that I had personally visited Washington, shown them a map, located both campuses, told them the numbers of students at each campus, but also over the weekend I had asked the State Department people if they would like me to ask the students to stay on the campus, knowing that they might, for some military or any other reason, want that to happen later on.
Further back, over here, they'll have to draw another small house right here.
There was specific intelligence available at the State Department and the CIA about the location of all the medical students. But that intelligence never reached Grenada. It was up to the rescued students to supply the information.
Did you ever establish why the intelligence never got where it should go?
It's one of the most frustrating experiences I've had, because I've asked everybody in the chain of command, I've asked the CIA, we do not have yet a straight answer as to why we did not have that intelligence in the right hands. The intelligence community says we knew about it, we had the intelligence. The troops who went in and were responsible for the operation clearly demonstrated to us that they never got that information. So there was a fundamental breakdown in communications between the intelligence community and the customers of that intelligence, that is, the troops who had to have it to perform their mission.
The search for the remaining students began. It was a priority assignment for the 82nd Airborne, but their mission bogged down in the heat and the steep hills just beyond the airport.
The main point that a lot of people never understood about Grenada, if, for instance, the Cubans there, or if the Grenada government and military forces had decided they wanted to execute those students that were the primary focus of the mission, the way we carried out that rescue mission or invasion would have allowed them to do so had they chosen to. In other words, the invasion itself could have dismally failed if our adversary had chosen to execute those students, because a number of those students were under the guns of the Cubans and the Grenadan forces for something like 24 to 48 hours in that time frame before they were ever rescued at all.
At the main campus of the medical school, 224 students remained hidden, with no one between them and the Cuban and Grenadian troops in the surrounding hills.
From the time the shooting started that morning, we thought it would be just minutes until we were going to be evacuated from the campus. The first noises we heard in the morning were the forces wiping out the Radio Free Grenada station, which was about 200 yards down the road from the Grand Anse campus. We waited on the campus for 36 hours. during that time, I honestly feel that had any of the Grenadians or the Cuban people wanted to take us hostage or injure us in any way, they had every opportunity to do so.
One thing I think that had crossed all our minds at one time or another was that because the sides were so unbalanced, is that the Grenadians would just make a last-ditch effort and just start grabbing students as hostages. And that's one thing that I think all of us had thought about at one time or another, especially at night.
In case of a revolution or an invasion, when you're in your insurmountable odds, what do? You'd figure you'd take hostages. Not one student was taken hostage at all during the whole thing, at any time. Not one student was harmed by any of the Grenadian people. The one thing we were afraid of the most, that a couple of people have made points here today about, is that I was scared about being caught in the whole thing. I was scared about this. I might have been caught. I was scared that it was an unstable situation and I would get hurt. But in the course of it, no one was harmed. No one was touched. Even when the invasion started, no one was touched by the Grenadian people. In fact, we saw one near miss of a student getting hurt, and that was by an errant U.S. bomb. So,
I think the key question isn't were we in danger or not after the Americans came in. I think we were. I mean, whether it was because somebody might have taken us hostage, or whether it was that one of the errant U.S. bombs might have accidentally killed us, or machine gun fire. The question is whether the Americans, our country, put us in more danger by invading.
The 82nd Airborne was moving far too slowly, and General Schwarzkopf, aware of the danger to the students and the mission, was forced to improvise from his command post on the USS Guam.
The progress on the ground was extremely slow. That terrain is terrible. The heat was terrible. The enemy was there. The Guam was sitting right off the coast, and you could look off the side of the aircraft carrier, and there was Grand Anse. I mean, it was there. You could see it. And one of the things that you saw was a wide open spread of white beach that would make an ideal helicopter landing zone. The other thing you saw was sitting right there on the deck of this aircraft carrier were all these helicopters. So as I say, it didn't take any great military genius to figure out that, gosh, why don't we take the helicopters that we have here, load some forces on board, fly right in from the sea, land right there, and you got perfect landing zones, and run an air assault operation and rescue the students. In 26 minutes, we evacuated 224 students without a single casualty of the students and only one light wounded on the part of the Rangers. It was absolutely a classic operation and came off without a hitch and was a great success.
You owe one hell of a lot of thanks to these guys who went in and got you out.
In Washington, there was a celebratory press conference.
Campus, the second campus of the medical college, has been evacuated completely with no casualties.
Now that's from my point of view, the best news of all, because that means that all of the students are now out and safe, and that is a very, very great relief. And that's again one of the things that I think was extremely skillfully done.
Secretary, you mentioned 20 to 30.
Secretary Weinberger was wrong. In fact, there were more than 200 students still awaiting rescue on Grenada. Their safety was now in the hands of the 82nd Airborne, then considered to be the Army's premier fighting force. But the 82nd was clearly unprepared for the conditions in Grenada. There were obvious morale and leadership problems, even though the opposition had been reduced to no more than sniper fire since the first day of the invasion.
Civilian population seems to want us here. They come down, they give us cokes, they give us fucking rum. And then at night, they fucking shoot at us, blow us away. Not even sure why we're here.
If they had brought you into the mission, told you this is Grenada, we're fighting the New Jewel movement, this is what we're going to be doing day one, day two, would that have made you a better soldier?
Would we have fought it with better morale and with more fortitude, are you saying? It probably would have. But like I said, we just knew. We got down there and said, well, you got to shoot at this guy. We're going to get these students out. It was too disorganized. We didn't actually know what we were fighting for. And, yeah, that would have helped out a lot. There would have been a little bit higher morale with it. There would have been a whole lot more fortitude put into it, intestinal fortitude, guts, in other words, put into it than what there was, not knowing what we were doing. And morale was low because we didn't know what we were doing. And even our senior officers didn't know what you're doing. When your senior officer doesn't know what you're doing, your morale drops pretty low.
Even those professional military experts who supported the invasion acknowledged the many serious leadership problems. William Lynn is a conservative and president of the Military Reform Institute in Washington.
Probably the worst performance overall was turned in by the 82nd Airborne Division, which managed with overwhelming superiority against a very poor quality opposition to advance about 5 kilometers in 3 days. Their tactics were bad. They had discipline problems. The performance of their commanding general was a little short of atrocious. Some serious problems there. It is a classic sign of bad infantry when as soon as they take fire, they hit the dirt and call for artillery or air support instead of maneuvering against the opponent. And that was routinely the practice of the 82nd Airborne units on Grenada.
We're going to call close air on the hey, use that. We're going to call close air on that damn Gulfport.
The key thing to consider when looking at Grenada is to recognize that our performance was, in many cases, not very good against absolute bottom-of-the-barrel opposition. That the situation we would face would be far more challenging in every respect if we were up against a first or even second-rate opponent. This is a fourth or fifth-rate opponent. So when we look at the performance on Grenada and people say, well, we did well because we won eventually, we have to say, fine, but the New York Police Department could have won on Grenada.
At its height, 9,600 American servicemen were committed to Operation Urgent Fury. On Thursday, October 27th, as the 82nd Airborne continued its search, the president went on television to proclaim victory.
I can't say enough in praise of our military, Army Rangers and paratroopers, Navy, Marine, and Air Force personnel, those who planned a brilliant campaign and those who carried it out. Almost instantly, our military seized the 2 airports, secured the campus where most of our students were, and are now in the mopping up phase.
Among those listening to the president's speech were many of the students still awaiting rescue.
I have to count Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
4 days?
Yeah, we waited for 4 complete days before we finally were able to leave Grenada. This is day 4 of the invasion after Reagan's speech that everything was under control. Actually, we had an American flag on the roof and had been waving at the planes and hadn't seen an American, with the exception of the 29 people in our house, for those 4 days. We were finally evacuated on Friday afternoon. It was really sort of comical because the U.S. Army had expected to find something. They had heard maybe there were 6 or 7 students back in Lansepine, our neighborhood, and in fact, about 100 students came out of the bushes once they came out and let us know it was time to leave.
In all, a total of 595 medical students were evacuated from Grenada by helicopter. With their rescue, the United States had fulfilled its stated objective. The students were safe. The revolutionary government was overthrown. The human costs of this brief war were at least 45 Grenadians killed and 337 wounded. 21 of the dead were patients of a mental hospital that was accidentally bombed by a U.S. Navy plane. 24 Cubans died. 59 were wounded. At least 19 Americans were killed and 116 were wounded, 85 of them seriously. They had gone to war knowing almost nothing about their enemy. The invasion of Grenada began as a war of words. In the end, it was celebrated by the government, the press, and many people as an American victory, and it helped re-elect an immensely popular president.
One year ago, we liberated Grenada from communist thugs who had taken over that country. I am proud also to say that during these last 4 years, Not 1 square inch of territory in the world has been lost to communist aggression. America is back.
After the invasion, behind closed doors at the Pentagon, the military rigorously examined its failures on Grenada. These classified meetings focused on the 82nd Airborne, the major ground forces of the invasion. Units of the 82nd were reorganized. Some senior officers were transferred or retired. As a direct result of the self-examination, the Army revised its training procedures and its doctrine, particularly its rules for how troops should be equipped during a tropical operation. The Pentagon tried to learn from its mistakes. But our investigation found no evidence of similar scrutiny inside the government's intelligence agencies, which had failed to supply vital information to American troops on Grenada. And here at the White House, the invasion of Grenada is still remembered as an American victory. I'm Judy Woodruff. Good night.
Next week on Frontline, a chilling look inside the mind of a young man who murdered a rock star.
Mr. Lennon was struck several times. We're not positive at this time as to how many times he was struck.
How did Mark Chapman decide he had a mission to kill John Lennon? And how many others like him are out there stalking celebrities? Watch The Man Who Shot John Lennon next time on Frontline.
Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for Frontline was provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Transcripts and videocassettes of this program are available. For a transcript, please send $4 to Frontline. Educational organizations may inquire about videocassettes by calling 1-800-424-7963.